Hello and welcome. My name is John Yanofsky, and I'm the director of Kupferberg Center for the Arts at Queens College. Thank you for joining us for tonight's KCA online program presented by New York Community Bank. It's good to see you all again here in this space, back here virtually, and I hope and trust that you're all safe in good health and spirits. The evening, we're really excited to continue with our writer series, Off the Page, Conversations with Writers, which is produced in collaboration with the Queens College Department of English, the Provost Office, and the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities. This event is also part of Queens College's Hispanic Heritage Month calendar of programs and is organized in collaboration with the Latin American and Latino Studies program at Queens College. And tonight, we are truly thrilled and honored to feature a reading and conversation with acclaimed author and NPR journalist, Maria Hinojosa. The evening is hosted and moderated by Queens College professor and author Vanessa Perez Rosario, who also serves as a curator for this series. Now, hopefully you all have been seeing some of the other programs that we've been doing as we relaunched this program last season and featured such amazing authors as Maza Megiste, Kimiko Han, Julia Alvarez, Claudia Raquin, and Sheree Moraga. We do hope you continue to come out for the rest of this season's events as well. And as we celebrate the new 21-22 season for Kupferberg, which will feature a blend of virtual and in-person events, we always like to take a moment and thank all of our funders and sponsors who make these programs possible. Our title season sponsor is New York Community Bank. We also receive support from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Max and Selma Kupferberg Family Foundation, who are our namesake and founding funders. And we also want to thank Hugh and Willow Books here in Queens for their support, where you can purchase some of the featured authors' titles, and which we always like to remind folks, which was founded by two Queens College alums. And last, but certainly not least, we want to thank you all for being here. Without you, these programs would not be possible. And as mentioned, the Off the Page series is curated and hosted by Queens College professor and author Vanessa Perez Rosario. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Vanessa into the broadcast.
Hi, John.
Hey, Vanessa, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm great. I'm excited about our program tonight. And good evening. Thanks to all of you for being here, being with us tonight for another Off the Page Conversations with Writers series. This is our second year of the series and our second event of the semester. Some of you may have joined us for other events. Thank you for joining us, because without you, we wouldn't have a series. These conversations are important. These conversations matter. I'd like to give a special thanks to Professor Zadia Feliciano, Director of the Latin American and Latino Studies program, who said to me last spring when we met for the first time via Zoom, let's work together to organize a Latinx Heritage Month event. And I'm grateful for her enthusiasm. This is Off the Page's first Latinx Heritage Month program. I also want to thank the Off the Page Planning Committee, who have been helping me to think through the series. From the English department, Professors Caroline Hong, Bill Orchard, Veronica Chenoz, MFA program from our MFA program in Creative Writing and Literary Translation, Amiel Alcali, Professor Bree Hopper, and Katie Manchin. From the Hispanic Languages and Literatures Department, I'm grateful to have Beatriz Carolina Peña and Mariana Zinni on our committee. I also want to thank our partners at Kupferberg Center for the Arts and for all of their support behind the scenes. Off the Page is now on social media, so you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I want to give a special thanks to Daniel Vasquez, a CUNY alum, who is live tweeting this event for us tonight. You can find him at offthepage_QC. I encourage you to find him if you're on Twitter. I guarantee that you will not want to miss his fun, witty, and insightful commentary on tonight's event. And he'll also be using the hashtag Once I Was You, the title of Maria Hinojosa's memoir that we'll be discussing tonight. Our event this evening will follow a familiar structure. Maria Hinojosa will read from her book, Once I Was You. This will be followed by a moderated conversation and then a Q&A with the audience. And without any further delay, it's such a pleasure for me to welcome Emmy Award-winning journalist Maria Hinojosa to our Off the Page Conversations with Writers series. I followed Maria Hinojosa's career as a journalist over the past 20 years. I've often used clips of her show, Latino USA, in my Latinx studies classes. I remember being moved and outraged at the injustices that Hinojosa revealed in her reporting in Immigrant Nation on CNN and Frontline's Lost in Detention. She was telling the stories that mattered to me, that mattered to my family. In 2010, Hinojosa created Futuro Media, an independent nonprofit newsroom based in Harlem with a mission to create multimedia content from a person of color perspective. As anchor and executive producer of the Peabody Award-winning show Latino USA and co-host of Futuro Media's award-winning political podcast, In the Thick, Hinojosa has been one of the few voices out there speaking about the changing cultural and political landscape in America and abroad. Now, in her newest book, Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a torn America, Hinojosa weaves the history of immigration policy and sentiment with the most intimate details of her own migration story. And after reading this book, my admiration for her as a woman, as a journalist, and as a Latina has grown deeper. Please join me in welcoming Maria Hinojosa to the broadcast.
Oh, Vanessa, that was very sweet. Thank you. It's very, I've gone back to traveling a little bit. And of course, I'm always in your borough when I'm traveling. In fact, I even tweeted out, last week I ended up at LaGuardia Terminal B, and I tweeted out, I was like, where exactly am I? I'm like feeling relaxed and entertained by the fountains. Like, we're not used to this, New Yorkers. And of course, it's because of lovely Queens that we have that. So even though I travel a lot, it means so much more when you're in your city and you're with your family. So I'm just like, oh, I'm so emotional because I'm here in Harlem. I mean, I'm across the bridge, I could almost see the bridge from here. But, I'm like, there they are. So I just feel like we're so close, and yet we're so distant. And I just want to say a shout out to everybody from Queens, because when I was laying in the bed that I'm looking at right now, because you're in my bedroom office at this time, this was where I was sick with COVID. And I was watching all of our paisanos and paisanas in line to get the COVID test, and just thinking about what we were living through in Queens, in the South Bronx. And so I just want to say, aquí estamos, no nos rendimos. We lost too many people. Many of us lost people very close to us, but no nos rendimos. And I see you, Queens. So thank you so much to Queens College and Q and Willow for having me. This is really, and to Kupferberg. Sorry. I'll get it right because I'm going to go there in person.
Yeah, we're looking forward to having you in person.
That's going to happen.
Yes.
So I'm going to read a little bit. My favorite part of these is the interaction. It's the give and take. You're probably like, oh my God, we're in Maria Hinojosa's bedroom. Let me look around. The painting behind me is my husband, Herman Perez. He's the same one that did these guitars. Those are his paintings. So I know that you're enjoying this moment, and I love sharing this with you so intimately. And I'm going to read just a little bit of my arrival story, which I didn't quite know until I wrote this book. But I really do look forward to your questions and the conversation. So the setup for this is that I had, when I wrote my first memoir, which was a motherhood memoir, Raising Raul, Adventures Raising Myself and My Son, I had understood that something had happened when we arrived by plane with green cards. So nosotros teníamos privilegio. We had privilege. Something happened in the airport when we flew from Mexico City to Dallas, and then we were going to change planes and go to Chicago to meet my dad, who had been hired as a research medical doctor to help to create the cochlear implant, help people who are deaf who want to hear the chance to hear. That's what he wanted to do. And so something happened at the airport, and it was in, this very beautiful saying in Mexican Spanish, no hay mal que por bien no venga. So the last administration was a very challenging one for many of us, Mexicans, Latinos and Latinas, immigrants. Uh, and and that kind of frustration is actually what led to this book, and what led to me uncovering, rather my mom, kind of uncovering lo que verdaderamente pasó en la frontera. So my mom, I say here, Berta understood that this green card meant that she had a right to be in this country, right? So we understood that we had privilege. We had the green card. We arrived to the airport, and she had seen the immigration agent from afar. His hair, the color of white corn tinged with yellow, a thick mustache, and so tall, this man, that Berta felt like she was looking up at one of the 100-year-old trees in El Parque Chapultepec. At 5 feet tall, Mom had to touch the back of her head to the top of her spine in order to see his face. Even so, Berta was not nervous to be engaging this immigration agent. She imagined his voice would sound like the gentleman from the Hollywood movies, romance movies that she loved, but at first, the agent didn't say a word. As each second passed, Berta saw that his demeanor visibly soured, his nostrils flaring and mouth pursing in disdain. He was scanning our faces to match them with our cards again and again, and then he was peering over our bodies. What exactly was he looking for? Still in her arms, I began to pick up on my mom's increasing anxiety, as if I was absorbing it by osmosis. Then the immigration agent turned to me. His eyes combed over every inch of my tiny body, and Berta pulled me even closer to her. He was fixated on a small reddish patch of skin on my arm, where a rash had developed from a substitute blanket that I had been using the last weeks at home, since my own blanket had now been packed away and shipped to Chicago. It was a minor allergic reaction to the wool from the Mexican highlands. The immigration agent looked at me, then turned to my mom and shook his head. "Ma'am, your baby looks like she has the German measles," he said in a thick Texas accent, "which is contagious. So we're going to have to put her in quarantine. The rest of you are okay to come in with your green cards, but the little baby girl, we're going to have to put her in quarantine and keep her." For my mom, those two words sent her reeling. Keep her. Her knees almost buckled, and she felt the urge to run away as fast as she could. How could she feeling both impulses at once? She had to force herself to take control of the situation. This man wanted to take away her daughter, her hija, her chicle. Berta had never before been told that someone was going to keep one of her children. Her heart was beating so fast, it felt like she had a hummingbird in her chest. She wanted to unleash a blood-curdling scream right then and there in the airport. It felt like someone had just sliced her open, reached in, and tried to rip out her heart, like in one of the sacrificios de los Aztecas. Berta took a deep breath. "Cálmate," she told herself, while at the same time she instinctively looked around her for allies and saw that she had no one who could come to her aid. A petite woman with nothing but her own guts to call on. She would have to defend herself. "Sir, I am Berta Hinojosa. I am the wife of Dr. Raul Hinojosa. My husband was invited by the president of the University of Chicago, and if you don't believe me, sir, you can call him yourself." I've often imagined that moment when my mom's inner voice of maternal strength and anguish came shooting up from within her in the form of an anaconda that wrapped itself around the immigration agent's biceps and started squeezing out for blood, coming in for the kill, like a mother tiger protecting her cub. "Under no circumstances will I allow you to keep my child behind. Our paperwork is all in order, and I know we have the right to come into this country, sir." And in that moment, the sexy, dainty mom in kitten heels, transformed into a monster twice the size of the agent. With a powerful voice, she yelled up at the man who looked like a tree and said firmly in her thick, unmistakably Mexican accent, "I am coming into this country with all 4 of my children, sir. Do you hear me? You cannot keep my child, sir. Do you hear me, sir? Do you hear me?" The agent shrank away from the verbal assault, suddenly looking very small. Berta had never wielded this tone of voice before. After her impassioned speech, when the fear and anger had been released and the adrenaline drained away, her body began to shake all over, her little ankles knocking against each other. She realized her own voice, strong, assertive, fearless, had made this man, tall like a Chapultepec tree, shrink to a shrub. The man was stunned. No one had spoken to him like this before. "Why, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am," he said, not quite knowing what else to do. I imagine he thought my beautiful mother would be quiet and compliant. How many other mothers had been? I couldn't have been the first to have been scrutinized and deemed too dangerous to enter the country. Was there a secret nursery in the Dallas airport in 1962 where they kept all of the deceased, diseased, and unworthy children like me? My mom had stood up to him, though, and because of her, I wasn't taken and held with other quarantined children who were scared, numb. It had to have been a mistake. That's what I told myself my whole life. That what happened in the airport was a fluke, a one-time occurrence. But I was wrong. In fact, there was a room for babies like me. And as I would discover in the writing of this book, that would be true. It wasn't just a room. It was an entire system, decades, centuries in the making. The immigration agent waved us through the checkpoint with his big, brawny hands as he said to my mom, Petite, who had now stood up to him con esa voz poderosa and said, "Why, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, correct. All of you may come into the United States. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to you and all of your children. Come on in." Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what a powerful opening for the book. I mean, I was really moved, and it grabbed me when I read the title of the book. Once I Was You, and I started, you open the book with that scene at the airport where you see these children, and I'm thinking, what is, where is she going with this? And then I got to that part. And I realized, and you say this later in the book as well, that in fact, this wasn't a fluke. The officers are trained to try to identify or find reasons to keep people from crossing, right, from coming in. And this something that maybe many of us didn't know about until recently, that this policy of separating children from families is something that's been going on for a long time. So you say that it's something that you discovered in the writing of the book. Is that partly that it was through the conversations with your mother that, or was that a story that she'd told you as you were growing up, or was it something that you discussed as you were writing the memoir?
No, so what happened was that we knew this story loosely. There's a saying in Mexican Spanish, which I love, se me cayó el 20, which is when you would put 20 cents into the coin-operated phone machine and click, the coin would drop and you'd be like, oh, the call has been connected. The call has been connected in my mom's mind meant that when she heard the tape of the voices of the children who had been put in cages and taken from their families. This is a story that was broken by Ginger Thompson in ProPublica. And we all heard the children crying for their parents in the cages. That's when my mom, that's when she realized everything that had happened. So she's in her 80s when she's able to put it all together. And she's like, wait a second, something happened. Wait a second, wait, they tried to take, and she called me up and she was crying. You know, when your mom calls you and she's like, ay, mijita, and you're like, ¿qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó? And she, ay, mijita, mijita. And I'm like, ¿qué pasó? And she's like, es que, you know, and then she was like, I see myself in the mothers whose children have been taken. I'm like, I know, Ma, it's so terrible. And then she was like, es que no entiendes. They tried to do that to you. And that's when I was like, what? Because I really had like anything, you know, it was always like, well, what a weird story. Or, you know, that agent was just like, what was going on with him? Like, what are you, crazy? And it's like, no, then when you realize like, well, it's actually tied to policy. In the case of the state of Texas, until the year 1964, any Mexican body, and I would by extension, Latino American body, was searched physically, as we are now, because we were thought to be bringing in disease. So by law, he had to search my body. And he did. He found that rash. That meant that there were other people that had been put in that quarantine room. What happened to them?
Yeah.
I would not have been the first. And it was really shocking. But I got to tell you, it was the most liberating thing, Vanessa. Even though I started crying, I was in an airport. I was actually in another airport. And I started crying and just like, oh my God. And then I was like, I understand why I do what I do. I understand why, as a journalist, I mean, I cover everything, right? Arts, culture, music, fashion, the environment, politics, you know, but immigration, I was like, oh, because this is what trauma looks like when it is deep in us. And the idea with Once I Was You is for all of us to be having these conversations, right? That's the hope.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, I mean, it is, of course, one of the things that you've covered over your career. As I said in my introduction, I remember, you know, Lost in Detention, Immigrant Nation. I remember watching
You're like a super fan. Like, you like, damn, girl. I'm like,
well,
right.
I am, that's true. But I also am a news junkie. I mean, I love watching, I do follow questions around immigration. My father's an immigrant. He came to the United States from Cuba. My mother is from Puerto Rico, not an immigrant, but still, you know, the question of immigration is one that's impacted my family a great deal as well. And so there's stories that are, it's important to me. The policies are important to me. They have had an important impact on my personal life and on my own, you know, my own family. So it is something that I follow. And I'm not a journalist, but I am a literature professor, and I love literature that explores themes of immigration. It's one of the things that I'm interested in and I work on. And so one of the things I think that you do so well in this book is retell the history of immigration in this country, go over policies, popular sentiment among Americans around the question of immigration. And you touch upon this idea that we hear repeated all of the time, that we're a nation of immigrants, right? We're a country of immigrants. And yet, you know, you have so many good quotes, but there's one in particular that stood out where, you know, this idea of us being a nation of immigrants, in reality, there's a very strong anti-immigrant sentiment that runs across this country, and it's not new. It didn't start with our last president. Right? So I wonder if you could, well, you say that anti-immigration is not a Republican or Democrat thing. It's an American thing until we decide it's not. I mean, those are powerful words. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
You know, people have asked me what was the hardest part of the book to write. Definitely, you know, writing about sexual assault is hard, especially when I wasn't planning on it. But the other hardest part was having to write the history of this country and having to write those words. Wow, it really is a Republican thing, and it really is a Democratic thing, as in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And that just kind of like the sinking feeling where you're just like, so immigrants, we're kind of on our own here. You know, we kind of got to make this happen on our own. We are the ones who have to make the country be the country that it says it is. And in that sense, if you look at this, the most recent census data, which should be blaring across every news media, right, which is Latinos and Latinas accounted for half of the total US population growth in the last census. Y eso de que maybe our numbers participating in the census were a little bit low because of, you know, the citizenship question and fears and all. We accounted for half of the total US population growth. So what that means is that how we tell our stories, reclaiming this notion. And by the way, I also understand many Latinos like you, Vanessa. Si tu papá es puertorriqueño, you're like, I'm not an immigrant. I'm Puerto Rican. I was born with an American passport, you know, American citizenship. I'm not an immigrant. And yet, it will fall to you. It will fall to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is also Puerto Rican, born in New York, not an immigrant. In the political sphere, and it's going to fall on every one of us, all of you all in Queens who are watching this, right? We are the ones who are going to have to basically hold the country accountable for the statue that is in our neighborhood, right? Because Lady Liberty, she's a New Yorker, right? So we have to hold her accountable and everybody else. It's not just going to be this notion, and that's what, you know, that's what's great about the difficulties that we've been living through, right? Is that we get to another point and people are like, híjoles, pues, wow, we really have to think about the United States as an immigrant country or not. What does that mean for us? That means that as immigrants or children of immigrants, grandchildren of immigrants, nosotros tenemos que representar, we have to represent. And my greatest thing is that, especially from Queens, that there should be any shame. And you know that there is shame, because we know that this exists. I'm talking to Queens because I love you all. But, you know, the second busiest intersection besides 42nd Street in Times Square is Flushing, right? The Flushing intersection. And the thought that the people that we see in that intersection, which are from all over the world and heavily Asian also, that there would be any shame in telling our stories, or any shame in being undocumented, or any shame in having DACA, or any shame in that our parents or grandparents cruzaron sin papeles. No, por favor, no. No, the first ones who came sin papeles were the Pilgrims. Let's just be clear. And if the indigenous people, the first peoples, our founding fathers and mothers, the Lenape people on the land in which we are right now, if they were telling the history, they would say, no, and there I'm going to use a slur, so trigger warning. They would say, no, pues, a ver, que you're the first illegal aliens. I know, it gets ugly. But we have to kind of go there in order to push ourselves, to make ourselves as a better country. And I'm not afraid to criticize the country that I levanté la mano and took an oath for.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I will just say one thing. My father's actually Cuban, not Puerto Rican. He's corrected me. Yes, he's corrected me all of my life and made sure that I don't let people forget that he's actually Cuban.
No, so tu papá es el inmigrante o refugiado, and your mom is the American citizen as a Puerto Rican woman.
Exactly.
So thank you for the correction.
No. He's corrected me all my life. So él quiere representar también, ¿no? So.
Y que viva Cuba, por favor. I mean, you know, La Habana is like one of in the top 10 cities of the entire world. I'm lucky enough to have been there several times. So, claro que sí. And it turns out, by the way, oh my goodness, in finding your roots, we were able to discover that I also have roots in Cuba a través de España, Cuba, Havana, Mexico. So,
Oh,
somos
wow, that's
paisanas.
amazing. Yeah. Great. So we talked a little bit about representation in this exchange that we've just had now, but I did want to ask you a question about representation because it's one of the things that comes up quite a bit in the memoir. You know, you say at some point early in the memoir that you looked for yourself everywhere, right? You wanted to be an actress, and then you also watched the news regularly. It was something that you did with your family. And you looked for Latinas, but you didn't find them. It's an experience that's common to a lot of us, I think. And so, but the thing that's also maybe not surprising, but I still am surprised or outraged by it. Very recently, Women's Media Center came out with a report, and still Latinas make up what? 2% of the women
2%,
invited
2%
invited to the Sunday shows. So I mean, what's going
on? So we, Futuro Media, the company that I formed, that I imagined right here in Harlem and dreamt up and created, we're now 11 and a half years old. We are the antithesis to what I'm about to tell you, right? Because we are nonprofit, woman-run, founded by a Mexican immigrant woman on 125th Street, run most recently by Black women. We are now in the search for a new CEO, and we represent what I would say is kind of like the future newsrooms. I don't like to say like the future because it's like the future is here. So we are the newsroom of the real America, as it were. And when I saw that data, so I, like many of you, grew up watching the Sunday morning political talk shows. Eso es lo que veía mi papá. My dad was an American citizen. He was the only American citizen in the family. And so he was like, I need to know about American politics because I have to vote. And so this became part of our thing, our shtick, right? And I would watch Meet the Press por mi papá. And then I was so lucky that in 2015, I was invited to be on Meet the Press, and I was there 7 times in a row. I was like, oh my God, I was like, this is amazing. And then they stopped inviting me because actually I said, look, that guy from Queens with the bad hair job, the bad dye job and hair job, that guy can win. And they were like, and they stopped inviting me on. And, now, there are very few Latinas, again, just 2% of Latinas are on as invited guests. When Latinos and Latinas are the second largest voting bloc in the United States. So this is an act of disrespect. Not just to, claro que yo lo tomo personal, obviously, I take it very personally because I'm like, yo, like I've been covering this in the mainstream media for the entirety of my career since before you all were born. And you're not inviting me to be on your Sunday talk shows? Why? Because I talk with my hands and I wear hoops or big earrings? No entiendo. Or I'm too old now? So yeah, I take it personally. But that's not even what I'm talking about. The bigger issue is that we're talking about saving American democracy. If Black women were central to saving American democracy as the push factor in getting the vote out across the country, Latinas are in those footsteps of Black women, understanding that it's on us to be engaged with American society at every level, whether as artists, writers, or as politicians. So for us to not be invited es una falta de respeto, no solamente a nosotras, a mí, sino at the entirety to American democracy. It's a slap in our face. So, I'm not quiet about this, and it means I probably won't get invited, but that's okay, because as you know, if you follow me, I created my own political talk show. It's called In the Thick, and we don't drop on Sunday mornings. We drop twice a week, and we have been mentioned on the best of, and we've received, the Webby nomination and the Webby Awards, and so we're cool. But should Latinas be on those Sunday morning political talk shows? Por favor, claro que sí.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things, I think we'll come back to this question, because Latinas aren't being invited. So, how do we remedy that? Well, one of the things to do is what you did. You created your own media show, and I think we'll get to that. I want to kind of work our way through the book a little bit, because there are other questions that come up. Of course, you were looking for representation. You didn't find it, or not much of it. But still, you managed to get an internship and work your way through to build a career in journalism. And one of the things that really struck me as I read it, which I would not have expected, was the way that you struggled with what we know as the imposter syndrome, or with the fear of how to represent yourself on the shows, how to, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. I think it'll be particularly important when I think about all of my young Latina students who come and talk to me and say, how do you do this? How do we do this? So you could say something.
It's been very interesting that people are like, why did you reveal that you have the imposter syndrome? Why did you do that? Why did you talk about how insecure you have? Because I don't, when you're writing a memoir, you have to be honest. Like, it's your rawest. Now I've kind of dipped my foot twice now into fiction, and I'm having a great time writing fiction. But when you're writing a memoir, it's like, I gotta, the trick is to not over reveal, right? That's where you have a great editor who pulls you back, right? But in this case, it was clearly a theme that my brilliant editor, Michelle Herrera Mulligan, was able to spot and really highlight, which is, yes, powerful women, especially if you're the first, like me, Latina, in all of the places where I worked, essentially. Of course, you're going to battle the imposter syndrome. I powered through. So I have some good news, some fun news. I have just finished writing a young readers edition of Once I Was You.
That's great news.
I'm so happy.
That's really great news.
So that means that in a year, when it drops, I can come and we can do this in person.
We can do it in person.
We can do it in person.
You can sign books for our students.
Por favor, claro. The thing is that I wanted to be able to say, look, this is in fact normal for us to feel this way. There's in fact a historical context for why we might feel this way. But also, here's the flip side about why. Like today, I did a presentation earlier today. I've done so many that I'm like, I can't even remember what I did earlier today. But I was, I was actually talking to a law firm, a very high profile actually. And I was, and you have women lawyers, right? Who are here and they're just like, but how do I do this? How do I manage? How do I not overrepresent big earrings, color, hair? How do I like, and I'm like, girl, you need to be taking up space in that place. Because what they are not understanding, okay, the structure basically is that it's a conversation of like, oh, how comfortable are you about us being our full selves? And I'm like, actually, the question is, that's going to happen anyway. It's like we're always thinking about other people's comfort levels, and what we have to do is we have to be our full selves, because that is what the reality is going to be like in the future. That's why I represent like this, right? Like, I'm not hiding, like, because esto es lo que es el. I want us as Latinos and Latinas to be this as opposed to, okay, I'm just going to throw it out there with all due respect, IKEA, you know, and I buy stuff from IKEA. No, you understand?
Yeah.
Like vibrancy versus we're going to just try to blend in and be, you know, colors that are not threatening. And I'm like, look, especially in New York, we got this. And we are, you know, Sonia Sotomayor, okay, I humble brag a bit. Yes, I know her. Yes, I've hung out with her. Yes, I've interviewed her on multiple occasions.
You interviewed her at Museo del Barrio, actually.
Claro,
I remember
claro.
that. I remember that event.
Absolutely. That was her first,
there,
the launch of her book, and Sonia said it may have been there, actually. No me recuerdo ahora because, you know, I've interviewed her several times, but she was like, for many Latinos and Latinas, the greatest sense of discrimination that we're going to feel is going to come from ourselves, where we say, no, no puedes, or how could we, or why? And it's just like, especially New York Latinos and Latinas, it's like, no, we got to take up that space. We have to take up that space. And, you know, as a fellow Queensian, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took up that space, right?
Yeah.
Not to say, by the way, I have politicians to me, and Alexandria, I have great respect for her, but I treat all politicians with, you know, a certain amount of distance. They're not my friends. But there is something to say about, you know, Queens basically being the voice of what politics looks like in the future, and especially Latinos and Latinas in Queens. So I'm all about giving you back your power. That's what I'm all about. I'm like, y'all are it.
So, but yes, you do that, right? I mean, in the memoir, we see you do that. You overcome your fear. This lovely part of the memoir where your husband Herman says to you, "Tienes que comerte el miedo." I love that. It's a great phrase, and you do, right? You do that. You decide you're going to be bring your full self to work. Put everything that you have into it, and you know, not hold back. But then, of course, one of the things that happens, so you do climb the ladder, and when you do that, you get pushback. Yeah. You get pushback. You get hazing. You suffer from people intentionally trying to exclude you. So yeah. So, you know, it's not. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. As a younger person, you kind of struggled with that inner fear, and then as you overcome that, there is real pushback that you get from the outside.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of people love about the fact that I wrote about several interactions because this book is also a journalist's book. Like, if you're at all a journalist and you love the news or behind the scenes of journalism, there's that, right? Because I reveal these conversations.
Yeah.
Where my editor, a white middle-aged man from the Midwest, is editing a Mexican Latina from New York City, and he says to me, "Oh, Maria, everybody knows about your Latino agenda, about your agenda." He says, "Everybody knows that you have an agenda." And I was like, "I have an agenda as a journalist?" Like, you know, as a journalist, you don't want to be perceived as having. Now I'm like, yeah, I have an agenda for the truth, for humanity, for civility, for basic legal, you know, representation. Like, so, but when you're starting out, and he said, "Oh, we all know you have your Latino agenda." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then I said to him, I had a comeback. You know, I don't usually, many of us are not prepared when these things are said to us. In that moment, I had a comeback, and I said, "Well, if I have a Latino agenda, then that means that you have a white male agenda." And he said, no, it's not the same thing. And I said, yes, it is. Yeah. So you are right. There was pushback, and Herman, the artist behind me, you know, Herman Perez, was really important in telling me, you got this. And he actually, I don't know if this made it into the book. I can't remember now. Or did it make it into the young readers edition? But I was like, he would say to me, "You know, I know that these white men who are your bosses are really important in your life right now, but in 5 years, they're not going to matter." And I was like, huh? And he was like, in 5 years, they will be out of your life. So keep this in context. And again, center your power. And I'm so thankful that Herman, who is, to be an artist that makes this kind of art, this was actually on the cover of Julia Alvarez's book,
Oh,
Homecoming. Yes, this is on
yes.
the
Yeah,
cover
I
of her
recognize
book
it
of
now.
poetry that it was commissioned.
Yeah.
You have to have a sense of self. And so I'm so thankful that I married an artist who was prepared to share that with me.
Yeah.
A Dominican artist.
Dominican, that's great. So, God, there's a lot more that I want to talk about, and we're coming up on 7:45. I think I want to ask at least 2 more questions. I mean, I feel like one of the things that's really moving and that is revealed over the course of the memoir is your experience with sexual assault, and being able to talk about that, being able to write about it, I imagine, and being able to talk about it with your mother. At one point you talked to your mother, your sister about it, how important that was in being able to recognize what had happened to you. And it's like there are these moments that we experience that sometimes we don't understand what's happening at that time. But it was such a important event that happened early on, and yet unfortunately too common. I don't know. I think it was so brave of you to write about it.
Thank you, sweetie. Look, did I cry when I was writing that scene? Oh my God. Absolutely. That was one where it was just like, but I am a product of the world around me, right? So I personally, because I have a great therapist, Argentina, refugiada, a brilliant therapist, Cristina, so I had already started to do some of this work, right? Because many of us women, we don't want to recognize, we don't want to talk, and it really does fester. So I had been starting to do this work. And then on top of that was the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court and the testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. And then all of us were just like, oh my God. And I was in the middle of that as I'm processing and writing at this book. And, Latinas, we are a very powerful bunch, right? We are powerful consumers in the United States of America. We are, again, leading in terms of enrollment in college and higher education and being present. And in the world of journalism and media, we're there, but we're often having to fight a lot. And sometimes that fight, you bring it home. And again, ego and all of that gets mixed up. And suddenly it's like your family is saying, oye, pero ¿qué pasó? Sometimes sexual assault can manifest like that because it's just you haven't resolved it, which is why I wanted to write this, because I want women to know, please do the work, try to find the therapist. There is, once you're able to understand, porque yo no entendía lo que había pasado. I definitely did not realize that it had happened to me when I was 16. I really had not. Like, it was when I told my sister and my mother I had to reveal, because I was going to be writing about it, that then it was like, no, you weren't 17 when that happened. You were 16. And it's like, híjole. So, so there is work that we have to do. Yeah. But there is another side. And that's why I'm also trying to say, as a woman survivor, hay otra cosa, right, that we can do. By the way, it's another reason why I took up boxing. I was really processing what had happened to me, and that in my mind, I needed to be strong. Even though, seriously, like, come on. I mean, I'm a boxer, but really, am I going to hit you? Like, like, seriously. But it's all part of the work that we have to do to feel strong. And so thank you for bringing it up. It is a very important part of the book and very intimate to me. So I appreciate that.
I think we should thank you for writing about it. I should say that too. I think we should move to take questions and comments from the audience. And let's see. We have a lot of
yay, Queens. Thank you for showing up. Yes, yes, yes. Love that.
We have a comment here from Luis Felipe Baron Gonzalez, who says, in the chapter entitled Land of False Promises, it seems that it contradicts the very popular phrase of the American dream. And another comment here from Laura R, of course. It was a scary experience, but that is how we keep.
What?
Oh,
no,
but that's how we keep terrible disease out of our country.
No, Laura, hold on a second. Hold on. So let me just talk about that for a second, because what happens in Once I Was You, let me try and do this really quickly. I understand what you're saying, but you're wrong, with all due respect. Con mucho cariño te lo digo, Laura, and please, let's not fall into these narratives. In the early 1900s, there was a white male eugenicist who created a narrative that said that Mexicans, because we were brown and presented poor, that we were dirty and that we were bringing in disease. That is the origin of the law that leads to me being almost taken from my mother. That law allowed for, through El Paso, the possibility that Mexican bodies were searched and then gassed with DDT, and then our clothing was taken and put into chambers where our clothing was gassed to remove the fleas. Guess who took the idea of gassing clothing to the next level? Yes, I'm sorry. The Nazis took the idea of what had been created in El Paso, and the gases that were used were then used on human beings. It is a very slippery slope to say, keep them out, take away the child, put their clothes, gas them. No. And by the way, we know that this pandemic did not come from south to north. This pandemic went from north to south.
Thank you. Rabia Osman says, it's heartbreaking and sad to go for mothers and children to go through these processes. Eliseo Nevares says that they've also just recently discovered their immigration story from their mother, from a conversation with their mother, something that they only had in pieces about their story about leaving Mexico. So there's a lot. Look,
that's why I talked, especially my familia from Queens, por favor. Like, Queens is so important in this whole story. So all of you have roots. And Queens represents the two fastest growing demographics that we have in our country, Latino, Latina, and Asian. And so you're right. You know, I'm a professor. Look, I'm a proud Mexican immigrant, so I have 16 jobs. So yeah, I run a company that's based right here on 125th Street, Futuro Media. I'm also a professor at Barnard, because Barnard is over that way, back over there. I forgot what I was going to say, but
well, I think we were talking about the discovering our immigration stories.
Right. So what
we don't know them.
So what happens, and what I have to say to my own students, right, is that our families are filled with shame and fear oftentimes. Even my own mother. My mother was in her 80s when she's like, oh my God, this is what happened. Because this kind of trauma of your families, if they're Mexican and they're in Queens, the possibilities of them crossing through the desert in the 1980s or early 1990s, what it feels like. I'm reporting about the desert right now. And there is no reason why human beings who are refugees or immigrants should be dying of thirst because of policies made in Washington. So Es verdad, there is a lot of fear. So here's what I suggest. Don't expect to get the story out on the first try, but you can use this conversation. Óyeme, you know, I was in this event with Maria Hinojosa. We were talking about the book and it raised some questions I'd really love, because your family, your grandparents, tios, tias, mom and dad, they need to kind of spend some time getting ready to recount what they went through. But is this urgent that you do and essential and that you pass it on? Please. Absolutely. This is what it means to make our immigrant country be the country that it says it is, by telling our immigrant stories over and over and over again, con orgullo. Whether we came con papeles o sin papeles, con orgullo.
I love that. And I think it's such an important lesson. I was just this week, talking to the director of the MFA program here, MFA program in creative writing here in the English department at Queens College. And she was saying, you know, what sometimes our students don't realize is that their lives are the material that they should be writing about. And they so often don't realize it.
That's what I'm trying to tell. That's what I tell my students. I'm like, you know, when we're talking in class, I'm like, oh my God, that story is amazing. Have you ever written about it? And I've come, surprisingly, more than once in this semester's classes, I found myself telling my students, like, you know, you can write a television show about that. You can write a book, you can write a novel, you can write a short story, you can write a television series. You can write a Netflix series, a Hulu series, you can. So yes, please don't feel those things that you think are the things about you. I'm from a working class community in Queens named Woodside, or, you know, Elmhurst, or Óyeme, that is the stuff of it. Julia Alvarez, who has spoken here, she wrote about her life. And interestingly, when I told Julia recently, because we're friends, okay, humble brag again, you know, and I was like, Óyeme, Julia, you got a Barbie? Because you all saw that she got a Barbie. Sadly, we can't buy them. You know, it was Celia Cruz and Julia, and she said, you know, when we got to the United States, we couldn't afford to buy Barbies. So there's no shame in the thing that you think is what, oh my God, I couldn't afford it. Or in my case, I did terribly on the SATs, which I think I write about in the young readers version. Those things that we are the most ashamed of is actually the things that show our vulnerability and make for the most kind of vulnerable and deepest connection in terms of our writing. So we need to own our voices, sin pena.
Yeah, great, thank you. Lazarita says, mainstream English language media does not understand Latinidad. They continue to ignore Latinx communities and think Spanish language media will cover it. I think that may have been a comment that was written around the time we were talking about the Women's Media Center report that came out. Alicia Evans says, thank you. I appreciate all the vibrancy that you bring to the screen.
Thank you.
She says, she continues to say, yes, walk into your true self. I love it. Arispreet says, when you trust in yourself, the universe just follows.
It's hard. Like, look, y'all, I don't want to make it like, this is hard, you know, and that's what I write about, the imposter syndrome, or, you know, like still struggling. I don't struggle with the imposter syndrome, but last week I was at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, being given the Medal of Honor. Oh my God, I have it right here. Segue to Medal of Honor, you know, from the School of Journalism in Missouri, right? But you know, all of a sudden I'm like, I'm the only woman here. Like, what I'm the only woman. I'm the only woman of color, and you know, and how we then try to overperform and just kind of be like, oh my God, I'll just make everybody laugh, and then it's like, I don't need to really be doing any of this, right? So also, especially for y'all from Queens, like, being from Queens is your superpower. That's how you need to see it. By the way, if you have not listened to our latest podcast, first of all, go check out everything that Futuro Media is producing. Our latest drop is Loud, the history of reggaeton with Ivy Queen. And it's helmed and written by a half Jewish white guy from Queens. So also we need to realize that our presence is borderless in the sense that hay muchos Latinos y Latinos that are going to participate in self-hatred, right? And we are going to have allies that are going to say, I'm right there with you, a la par. And that's kind of what the future looks like. We know that solidarity only on the issue of ethnicity or identity or even race is an issue. We have to build coalition that is based on something bigger, like justice.
Right. We have a question here from Daisy Espinosa, who says, what do you say to a young Latina journalist who wants to know where she belongs in an English newsroom?
Don't give up, please. I know this is hard. Believe me, you know, when I hear and I see the numbers that are still so poor in our newsrooms of Latina, specifically representation, oye, make it, again, this is an affront to American democracy that Latinos and Latinas are not represented in our newsrooms. So arm yourself with the data, put some honey on your tongue, and find the editors or senior people in your newsroom that you feel you can have a conversation with. Because what you're really doing, this is what's so difficult is, you know, Sandy Ratley, who's my best friend, you read about her in the book. She's a Black woman, you know, a senior media executive, 3-time Peabody Award-winning. And we were at NPR together, and we would be like, you know, people would be like, oh my God, here they come again, complaining about Latinos and Black people on public radio and how we're not represented. And we were seen as some kind of a problem. And it's like, you don't understand. We're actually doing this because we want to save your media company, fill in the blank, whatever newsroom you're at. Futuro Media, our numbers, the real numbers, by the way, that's a dig to Carlos Watson and Ozzy. So our real numbers are consistently growing. And that's because we're telling these stories authentically, and we're communicating and connecting with an audience in a demographic that is growing. So if your news media organization that you're working for or consuming is not representing us, you know, I think I should be on primetime on MSNBC all the time. They don't pay me. If it's not me, it should be any other Latino or Latina journalist, analyst on primetime all the time, because we represent the second largest voting bloc in the United States of America. So in your newsroom, that's what you bring up. Bring up the data. Latinos and Latinas, how do we vote? What is our population growth? What is you know, our stories? We're not just by the way, as you know, immigration is a central issue for me, but immigrant and Latino and Latina journalists don't only report about immigration. Report about everything: economics, business, style, music, lo que sea, business. You know, if Latinos and Latinas were a gross domestic product, we'd be 7th or 8th largest in the world. That's the kind of data that you bring nicely and respectfully into your newsroom, because we got the power, we are the future, and y'all need to understand that with love.
Thank you. We have another comment here from Eliseo Nevares, who says, Maria, I want to thank you for sharing your imposter syndrome. I work in a very white space and sometimes feel out of place. This conversation makes me feel not alone. Gracias. I want to say to Eliseo, then you should read the book, because the conversation was great, but the book will also help you overcome, you know, think about your own imposter syndrome and make you feel, you know, like you're not alone, like it's not just you. Even someone powerful like Maria Hinojosa struggled through the imposter syndrome. The book is available in English. It's available in Spanish. It's available in paperback. And there's an amazing audio version of it where you can listen to the author reading it herself.
That's right. And now there's an audio version in Spanish. I didn't do it because I would not be able to do it in a month. It's narrated by my friend Yareli Arizmendi, the actress. And then remember, in a year, once I was you, the young readers version, really, because we need to understand that our immigrant kids, our Latino and Latina kids, our Afro-Latino and Latina kids are kids of color. But in particular, if you were an immigrant or a refugee, you know, you may have been taken from your own parent or family member. And this would have been like, what, 5 years ago now? 4 years ago now? So if you were 6, you're now 10. If you were 10, you're now 15. So you are part of American history. And that's why in part why I wrote the book, the young reader version, so that you and we can see ourselves as young people in this country with voice and with power.
It's great. Thank you. We have all kinds of great links here in the chat. Kupferberg has added Futuro Media Group. So you've asked people to go check out your podcasts and your new shows. So those are there. And if you want to pick up copies of the book, Q and Willow, we encourage you to support independent bookstores. Q and Willow is
Q and Willow,
our partner, and you can pick up all of the versions that we just talked about there. I think maybe in closing, I wonder if you close the memoir with a request, with an ask. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what people can do to help address the question of our broken immigration system. We hear it so much sometimes that it loses its meaning almost.
Yeah.
So
look, I mean, Queens really should be, honestly, if you ask me, like, I would go hardcore radical. I'd be like Queens, which has a strong activist pro-immigrant rights group, but given the immigrant nature of the borough of Queens, I would love to see Queens actually bringing it at the forefront of immigrant rights. You have organizations that exist that are based in Queens that are super radical in doing this, like Make the Road, because you represent this, you embody it. You don't have to recreate the wheel. So there are organizations that are doing everything from community organizing to the frontline work of meeting people who are arriving at Port Authority or at LaGuardia, right? Sin nada, right? Because they are, taken out of a immigration detention camp, with the clothes that they have on, they have nothing. And then all of a sudden they arrive in our city. So there are people who do that kind of frontline organizing of meeting people and caring for them, helping them get from one place to another, transporting them from, to meetings because they're refugees and immigrants. I mean, I'm all straight up, like, seriously, as a New Yorker, I'm like, to all my people, I'm like, whoever delivers my pizza, I'm like, óyeme, ¿tú de dónde eres? Where are you from? Oh, de Mexico. And a ver, ¿de qué parte? Oh, de Oaxaca. And how many languages do you speak? Oh, you speak Nahuatl, Zapotec, Mixtec, and then, talking with my adult children about what that represents. So engaging visually, like y'all in Queens, it's on an everyday, right? On an everyday. But at the height of the pandemic, well, when they started opening up groceries, I was that person that was walking on the grocery stores, like up on Broadway, and I'd be like, and I'd see the paisanos, I'm like, gracias, paisano, eres esencial. Gracias, paisana. Tú también eres esencial. Like the way I did with the firefighters after 9/11. I was that person who was waving at them. So I go like hardcore. And then to go deeply political, like the organizing that needs to be done to stop this immigration detention and deportation industrial complex where private prisons are making money off of our bodies. So New Yorkers, we are survivors. So here's the thing. Esto va a seguir así unless we speak up and get involved to the level that we can be, because, I had a green card up until the time that I was 30. So I could not participate in a certain level of protest. And now as a journalist, I can't participate in protest either. But that's your responsibility. My founding father, as a journalist and as an American, is Frederick Douglass. I'm very lucky. I live 5 blocks from his statue right here in West Harlem. And he said that the greatest act of love and patriotism was to criticize our country. So no es una falta de respeto when we demand more from the country that tells us that it loves immigrants and that it loves people of color. We have to make that true.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has just been such a wonderful conversation. Oh, it's an amazing memoir. So I encourage you who haven't read it, pick it up. You'll enjoy it. It makes a great gift. So thank you for being with us tonight. I think John's gonna come back into the studio.
Thank you, Queen. Love you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for all of that amazing conversation. And really, the Queen's love, Maria, is deeply felt. We're proud of our borough too.
Yes, please, Queens, be proud. Queens, Staten Island, the Boogie Down, y'all are my favorites because you get passed over, and it's now so much respect. Absolutely.
That's right. It's not just one direction. It's not just bridge and tunnel that way. It's a pore, as you said. These cultural borders are porous, and the cross pollination happens very deeply. So, thank you for all that you brought to this program tonight. Really appreciate it. We always like to reinforce and remind people about ways that they can continue to engage with your work. I know that we put a bunch of it down in the social media and the YouTube comments, but we like to put it up on the screen as well for ways that people can follow you on IG and Facebook and Twitter. There's your Twitter handle.
Oh, also, here's another one because I have a new platform. It's a weekly newsletter. Let's see, mariahinojosa.bulletin.com. And it's called Malu and You. You can just go to any of my links, and it's actually just a weekly little fun newsletter. My musings, so a little bit unfiltered. So Malu and You is my newest platform, and we're having fun.
And all of your copious spare time. Where do you find all the time to do all the things that you do? Like true New Yorker. New Yorker.
And I sleep 8 hours, so there.
There must be a twin somewhere. And then we also want to encourage people to continue to engage with the Off the Page program. Vanessa and her team have created some special ways for you all to continue social media. We can put those up on the screen now for Off the Page _QC on IG, Twitter, as well as Facebook. Please continue to be a part of this community that we are creating and continuing to foster. We also, again, want to give a good shout out to Q and Willow Books, where you can purchase Maria's latest and most greatest memoir, as well as other authors, both past as well as future. We do have now a complete list of previous Off the Page authors. So if you're just trying to build your Off the Page library, please patronize Q and Willow. We really, really want to bring a lot of attention to not only their independence, but also their Queens College through line. And then we, of course, want to thank everyone here tonight. Maria again, Vanessa, our production team of Teresa Lenz and Andres Luke behind the scenes, making everybody look good. Our chair of the Department of English, Glenn Berger, our dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, Bill McClure, and the Queens College Provost Office. So that is going to bring us to a close tonight. We do hope that you come back for our next KCA online program. You can always find out what's happening both on screen and thankfully back in person by checking out our website, kupferbergcenter.org. Our first in-person event will be the great Latin jazz pianist and icon Eddie Palmieri, who will be in our beautiful LaFrac Concert Hall for 2 shows on November 20th. That will be our first in-person. Maria, we would love to have you as our honored guest. Please feel free to
I may take you up on that. I may take you up on that.
Please do, please do. And again, we will also be continuing this series. I know we've just booked an artist for March, and there'll be continued kind of announcements as more performances, programs, and events come both online as well as in person. So please continue to be a part of our Pepperberg family. Most importantly, thank you all at home, in your offices, on the road, in the car, down the street, walking your dog, for being a part of this evening's program. We do hope everyone stays safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you again next time. Have a good evening.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.